Leaders Talk, the interview podcast portraying leaders who are committed to better leadership, better organizations, and a better world. Powered by Leadership Choices.
We have three very interesting personalities tonight. We have Dr. Abiola Sarnecki. She is a lecturer on organizational behavior at the European Business School in Wiesbaden, Germany. We have Racheal Govender, a psychologist and coach, who is also the owner of her own consultancy, Dynamic at Work. And we have Pierre-Yves Rahari, who is a partner at Algome Consulting. And all represent different parts of the world, different upbringings, and I'm very, very interested to see how they see the topic of structural racism and what their own personal encounters with this are.
The point is always to ask yourself, what is it really going on right now? So it's a very easy question to ask. It's a very difficult question to answer.
I remember the last time I went for a conference and there was the registration desk and it was a conference for academics, right? And the woman asked me for my ID, but she didn't ask anybody else.
For me, it's just ignore the last 175 years of my history, ignore my identity of who I am, and go immediately to calling me Indian.
Welcome to this episode of Leaders Talk, our new podcast. This is a special edition. We have a virtual panel discussion on the interesting, challenging, and also emotional topic of structural racism in Europe, and maybe a little bit of why do we do this. Obviously, the current events in the United States and elsewhere have let us all think, feel what is going on there, what can we do. There's a lot of emotions in there, and it is easy to point fingers and say, this is a big structural problem, you need to fix this, you in the US. But I think we also have a lot of housekeeping to do on our side. And for us at Leadership Choices, this event, the death of George Floyd and all the riots or demonstrations afterwards, the violence, the polarizations, the finger pointings, all that led to the question, so what about us? What about Europe? What about Germany? What about the UK? What about the Netherlands? What about racism in these countries? Obviously, we are all opponents of racism. Everybody, I think, here in this call is a strict opponent of violence, but there is a more subtle way of racism, a more unconscious way, a more structural way that is not physical violence. It is not done by the police, but it is maybe done by us, maybe unconsciously, maybe unwillingly. And so the idea of this panel discussion is really to be curious, with a curious mind, and try to understand, so what is it that we as mainstream, mainly white people typically don't see? What is it that is out of our radar? And since we don't know what we don't know, we might be missing something. And so I asked myself, who could be helping us with this? Who has experience with this from different perspectives? So I found three colleagues and friends that I go back with since a long time. And I would like to introduce them shortly, and then they will introduce them a bit more extensively themselves. So first of all, there's Dr. Abiola Sarnecki. We have started together at Accenture, God knows when, it's a long time ago. And we have been to Chicago together in trainings, and we kept in touch ever since. Racheal Govender, I had the honor to meet in Cape Town, actually. And so we go back till 2010. My first exposure to Africa, another element of, oh my gosh, what am I missing here from my image of the world? And Pierre-Yves, who has been a fellow student at our executive MBA at Kellogg WHU, So that is also ages ago, and thank God we kept in touch somehow, and I reached out to you. Would you be willing to help us with this? Would you be willing to be on this podium? And without a second of hesitation, all of you have agreed to be here with us. And so thank you, first of all. Thank you very much for being here with us. That's really, really great. Much appreciated. Before we go into the introduction, there's one thing I obviously want to make sure. We had a pre-call last night, and one thing that became very, very clear is these are three individuals with three individual lives, three individual perspectives, and not the same opinion. And so we will experience that there's different views, right? And this is great. Three human beings, and there's more human beings here in this call. And so if we have this attitude and the curiosity of trying to find out what makes you believe this, or what is your background, that I think would be the attitude that I would want us to have for this call. All right, so the entire topic of Leaders Talk is around people who are trying to create better leadership, better organizations for a better world. That sounds lofty, but for us this is very concrete, and part of it is to create an organization, to create a business where people can thrive, where people can bring what they are to the party, and where they are welcomed in this place. And so this is the reason why we're having this call. All right, so much for me talking. Abiola, would you do me the pleasure and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. No problem. So, as Karsten said, my name is Dr. Abiola Sarnecki. I've known Karsten, actually, I know it's 1996 that we met. Yeah. I am a lecturer in organizational behavior at the EBS University in Germany. So in Österreich-Winkel, which is a small little wine town outside Frankfurt. I teach organizational behavior and HR, and I also teach intercultural competence. I am actually an engineer by profession. I have 15 years consulting experience, after which I decided to go into academia. Don't ask me how I got from engineering to organizational behavior, but it does happen. I grew up in Nigeria. I studied there as well, and then did my master's in my MSc in digital electronics in King's College and my MBA at Imperial College. My experiences are actually interesting because growing up in Nigeria and then studying and living in the UK and then coming to live in Germany has given me quite, I think, a wide perspective of working and living in these three societies. So I'm very lucky for that.
Thank you, Abiola. The next one on the panel tonight is Racheal Govender. Racheal, would you fill us in about your background, please?
Yes, Karsten, thank you. So I'm Racheal Govender. I'm South African. I moved to Belgium and lived for 8 months, and then moved to the Netherlands, and I've been living in the Netherlands for the past 6 years. I'm trained as a psychologist, also working as an executive coach, and previous to that, I worked as a HR exec within strategy, marketing, and communications in the finance area, finance industry in South Africa. What else can I say? Yeah, so I've lived in 3 different countries, experienced what is life, especially as a person of color. Yeah, and my special, I work as a leadership development consultant, focusing at the moment on women in leadership as well, and creating bite-sized training for women in leadership. Also just launching my podcast called Women's Work for women, aimed at women in leadership and women of color in leadership. And I didn't mention this last night, but I'm writing my first book on introversion, extroversion, and ambiversion for leaders, and providing some tools.
Wow,
so,
great.
Yeah,
Thank you, Racheal.
So I'm a little busy.
A little busy person, okay. And the third one, by no means last one on this panel, is Pierre-Yves. Pierre-Yves, what do we need to know about you?
So my name is Pierre-Yves Rahari. I'm based in London, where I run a consulting and leadership development firm, which specializes in the wealth and asset management industry. My background has essentially been in business, and more exactly in finance. I've grown and developed in banking and asset management. And as Karsten referenced, my training initially has been in business. I went to business school in France. I went to business school in Germany and America. And later on, I trained psychoanalytically to move into my role as executive coach. And that training I've had essentially done in the UK.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm curious around these situations. What is a typical situation, maybe asking Racheal, what is a typical situation in a business setting that you encounter where all of a sudden you realize the color of my skin plays a role in this conversation?
I think the typical situation is, well, there's many, but I'll share the first one that comes to mind is when people see me, especially now that I work internationally, they meet me the first time, there's a surprise. I've also had where people tend to be a bit more resistant. And the end result being a comment like, well, I was really skeptical working with you, but I'm surprised at how good you are.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
That's a typical situation.
So an association with quality or experience that goes together with that.
Yeah.
Abiola.
And competence.
And competence, yes, absolutely. Abiola, how do you see this? What's your perception of that topic?
Well, I hear Racheal because I see it a couple of times. I must say that I'm lucky in the organizations I've worked for so far, because those happen to be, I realize my position of privilege in the sense that I've worked so far with organizations that welcomed my diversity. But every single time I had this interface with people who I didn't normally work with, it was very interesting. I remember the last time I went for a conference and there was the registration desk, and it was a conference for academics, right? And the woman asked me for my ID, but she didn't ask anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay.
And I think I was speechless, mm-hmm. right? And there was this other woman standing next to me. She was white, and then she said, "Why didn't you ask me for my ID?" Mm. And I looked at her and I said, "Thank goodness somebody who spoke up."
Yeah. Okay. And I'm sure that there are many occasions where nobody speaks up, right?
Many occasions.
All right. Now, Pierre-Yves, you live in London. This is a melting pot. Whenever I'm in London, I'm struck by all the different people that live there. Do you experience the same?
There are some subtle situations where you realize something is happening. In a business context, it usually happens for me around the table. When you go for business lunches or dinners, it's usually dinners in London. Rarely, even if I book the table, do I get the wine list, which normally is handed to the host, and which always puzzles me because as a French person, I kind of am the one person around the table who knows their wine. And you kind of overlook it and you politely carry on with the lunch. And then comes the time of the bill. Probably 7 times out of 10, the bill never comes to me, even if I'm the host. And that says volumes. No matter how fancy or simple the place is, these are the occasions where sometimes, you get a punch in your heart and you go, gosh, I thought we were over that.
Wow. That's amazing. And this is a situation that a white person never sees, never encounters unless you're a witness to this, right? So the topic for tonight is structural racism, which I'm aware is a strong word. So how would you describe structural racism? What is it actually? What's behind it?
So if I can
go ahead, please.
Respond to that, perhaps. I mean, I actually went to research it when I first heard the term, and it made sense to me because structural racism is something that was put in place years before any of us were born or our parents were born, and sometimes even our grandparents were born. These were things that were put in place by people that thought differently. And of course, I'm not going to go to the whole history of slavery and the Western world colonizing other countries, but this is a way of thinking and way of policies, practices, and cultural representations. The interesting thing about it is that it can exist even though we're not aware of it, even though we're not aware that these practices exist. Systemic racism is talking about the systems, and I think many people know about systemic thinking, but it is a system that's put in place through the structural racism system, and it marginalizes and excludes people on the basis of color, even though most people in the system are probably not intentionally trying to do it.
Okay, and that probably is that the same thing as unconscious bias, or is there more to it?
There is more to it in the sense that, like, unconscious bias is something that I'm doing. I'm not aware, and sometimes it comes through the system, but there's more to it in terms of, for example, you hear the term white privilege, and it's very hard to be able to define it because it's something that you gain through history and through structural racism, that you cannot necessarily see it. And I've seen a lot of arguments where people say, well, if I have white privilege, why am I poor? And that's not the point. The point is, if you had to compare, and it's in comparison to a white person and a person of color, you see the discrepancy. And I heard the best description I heard was by a person of color from the US that said it's like a skewed game of Monopoly. I don't know if everyone knows the game of Monopoly, but for years you've had white people traditionally going around playing the game, getting the 200 euros as you pass begin, and you're able to build up a certain amount of education, access, all sorts of things. And then you have people of color that are going around not getting it. And because of that, you're not aware, for example, networks. You have, white privileges, you have a better network than people of color, for example.
Okay, that makes sense. Pierre-Yves, what is your take on the topic of structural racism?
I want to put our conversation into context, if I may, Karsten, first. I think you did a very, very good job at introducing tonight's conversation by saying we're actually having this conversation because something absolutely horrific happened in America. George Floyd was killed by a policeman. It was done in absolutely horrific manner. It was filmed and it went social. It went viral on social and then started erupting a number of riots in America. And those riots started to translate in Europe. So we're seeing riots and demonstrations in the UK. We're seeing demonstrations in France. We're seeing demonstrations in Germany and all across the country. And it's in that context that you organize those conversations. And it's really, really important to acknowledge the emotion that is being triggered by what happens in America. And now we're having this conversation where we're trying to define structural racism in Europe. And I'd posit a couple of things. Racheal made reference to history, and I think we have to think very, very carefully about the history of America. and we have to think very carefully about the history of Europe. The same way I think we need to think very carefully about the history of Africa. The same way we're going to have to think very carefully about the history of Persia. The same way we're going to have to think very carefully about the history of India and China and Russia, etc., etc. And the reason I'm making reference to all those places is because I believe that the conversations we have are always contextual. And they are contextual, and they are made in a position of they are made in a way where we are looking at things from a certain angle and not from another angle. It's just the nature of how we operate as human being organizations. So when I'm hearing the terms of structural racism in Europe, I kind of cringe a little bit, because I'm starting to ask, what is structural racism and what is Europe? And I'm having a little bit of difficulty of generalizing what happens in one country or the other, etc., etc. Yes, we're trying to build a European nation, but there are different ways and different places and different contexts. You made reference to the UK, for example, where we know that the choice that has been taken by the UK society has been multiculturalism, where there is a very strong definition of you as a being based on your ethnic origin or your religion or your skin color, etc., etc. And I contrast that with another country which is European, which is France, where the definition of society, and I'm not going to argue whether it works perfectly or not, but the definition of society in France is universalism, where before being anything else, you're French above all. And then you may have some characteristics. You can be blind, you can be tall, you can be blonde, you happen to have blue eyes, or you can be black. But the first definition is the belonging to the French Republic. And again, I am not arguing that it's working perfectly, but it's the direction of travel when you are French. So you already see different models in Europe. I'm not as familiar as the Netherlands as Racheal would be, but happen to be married to a Dutch gentleman. And the situation is slightly different. So when I was able to quote examples where I know my skin color is playing or is coming into play in my interaction with some individuals, I'm having a very, very hard time supporting the idea that there is fundamental structural racism in Europe. There are pockets of places, situations, etc., where it's more prevalent than others, but I would guard myself from drawing a blank generalization on what happens in Europe.
So what I hear you say is we need to be specific by country, so that different countries approach the topic differently, and that there are occasions where racism or where you're treated differently because of the way you look, but you would put a question mark if you would label this a structure.
Yes. I would go a little bit further, Karsten, by proposing that, and of course this betrays my analytical training, I would propose that the point is always to ask yourself, what is it really going on right now? So it's a very easy question to ask. It's a very difficult question to answer. And there are the microdynamics of what happens in the very situation. You know, I go back to the situation of my business dinner table, and I don't know what happens with the waiter, and I don't know, but that's the situation. So there is the micro situation, but I would propose always to think about what is the bigger context, what is the society you're in, what are the individuals involved in the situation, and really prudently try not to draw too many conclusions or generalizations on what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Can I jump in?
Sure, Abiola. You would be the next anyways.
Oh, that's good. Because what Pierre-Yves said is caused some emotional, I don't know. We had a bit of this conversation yesterday, and he knows that I do not agree with him. Because I do believe that there's structural racism in Europe. Mm-hmm. And it manifests itself in many different ways. Racheal used the analogy of monopoly. I would use the analogy of a spider's web, right? Where you have the whole web is let's talk about the institutions, the laws, the policies. And then you have the parts of the web, which are the structures. So you have the job market, you have the housing, you have education, and so on and so forth. And the ways those things are put together, right, will determine where you as a fly get caught in, right, mm-hmm. and where it touches you. And so structural racism for me is more to do with the big picture of how society functions, mm-hmm. rather than the one-on-one interactions. Mm-hmm. The country that I know best, because I've been here the longest, is Germany, right? Germany in itself, the way that the laws are structured has a lot to do with trying to equality. Education is a right. Everybody has access. It's free, all the way, even university level, right? The same with healthcare. Everybody has access to healthcare, right? It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are, which by definition, which you can then translate to say everybody who lives here has access to healthcare. That is true. But how do those things operate? What is it that is in those, and as Racheal said, this skewed monopoly, skewed differently in different countries, right? And let's think of Germany for a minute. The UN actually even accused Germany of its structural racism and said, look, you're going to have to do something about this. And I see it as well. There are people who cannot they don't have their studies. And there are quite a number of studies in Germany that actually have done experiments that if you are a female and you're Turkish and you have a scarf on, you have a 4.2% chance of getting a positive response. If you're white and you have a German sounding name, you have, I think, what was it they said, 40%, right, of getting a positive response. So it's not the law itself that is different, but the way that it's applied, right? The way that people actually implement these things. You go into the not even the jobs, the housing market, right? You want to rent a flat. You can be rest assured that if you're white and you're named Gunter Meyer, you are probably going to get that flat. And if you are Black, African, you will not get it. Yeah. Right? And that is the way the structure is actually implemented. So yes, the laws are there because they want people to be equal and they go with thinking of equality. That's the way it operates in real life. Mm-hmm. And if you happen to be somebody who does not have that, if you don't have the privilege, as Racheal said, then you get burnt in different places. Mm-hmm. I see it very often where you want to go somewhere, you get to the airport and they zone in on you. Where's your ID? And you know exactly why they're asking you for your ID, mm-hmm. right? You want to get into a nightclub, they ask you for your ID and you know exactly why. Mm-hmm. Because nobody else is being asked, mm-hmm. right? So, and those are the things that come on over and over and over again.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just trying to see if there is a commonality between what you're saying and what Pierre-Yves is saying. But what you're saying is actually on the side of the structure, the rules, there's not a discrimination by color of skin, by race, but the way they are applied, and there's case by case by case. And if you connect all the dots, then you get a structure of discrimination and of racism. But
Karsten,
if you look
in Germany, mm-hmm. right? I cannot speak for every single country because it's different in every single country. There is where I would agree with Pierre-Yves that there's a context in every country.
Right.
In Germany, that is how the laws are done. I'm not sure about the UK. I think the UK is slightly different in the way the laws are done. But that implementation and the way people experience it is a factor of their skin color. And there's even a ranking. There's the class A foreigner who's American, right? Black Americans also fall into that category, by the way, right? And then there's the one at the bottom of the rung. They are the Africans. And then these days, the Muslims also belong to the bottom of the rung. And there's this ranking. These are the accepted races, and these are the ones that are not really. And it touches on you every single time.
Racheal, please.
Yeah, so I have to agree with Abiola. And I mean, I'm based in the Netherlands, in The Hague. So I do see it. I do see structural racism. And also, you know, I have been speaking to a number of friends and colleagues that live in the Netherlands, also live in Belgium, and some that have lived in the UK, and they've experienced it everywhere in terms of structural racism and systemic racism. Just to come back to Abiola, in terms of some stats, there was some research done at the University of Amsterdam and Utrecht between 2016 and 2018 about job applicants. 4,200 people applied to companies, and they used different surnames. And what they found was that 20% of immigrants, so Western immigrants, had a 20% less chance of being invited to a job interview. Candidates with non-Western immigrant background, and also you could see with the surnames, 40% were not invited to a job interview. And especially for job applicants in the Netherlands, Turkish, Moroccan, or Antillean were not invited. So I think from a point of policy, I've experienced it myself, even moving here. If you want to talk about global policy, and this is, I know it's supposed to be, work related, but this is also impacts work. If you think about what is your the top 10 most powerful passports, and I've Googled this because I wanted to check it for myself. The top 10 all come from white countries. The top most 10 powerful passports. The bottom 10 passports, the least powerful, are from non-white countries, right? Also coming from South Africa, I know I always say we have a really bad passport. We cannot get anywhere. And it's also, one of the things I think about systemic racism or structural racism, it acts as a gateway. So or gatekeepers. So they keep you out of opportunities. And as a South African, coming to Europe, I have to apply for visas everywhere I go for work. I have to pay a lot of money. I have to make an appointment. I have to spend a lot of time filling in lots of documents. I always say it's I have to give a pound of flesh as well. Really thick documents proving exactly where I'm coming from, whether I have enough money, whether I'm going back home, and wasting a lot of time. So sometimes when I get, different opportunities, I have to weigh it to say, can I go there? Because I have to go through all these processes because I don't have a passport that is a Western, white, approved, powerful passport.
So it's a bit it's a bit of structural distrust.
Structural distrust, but it's also something that's been inherited. Why is it, if you look at passports, from the Southern Hemisphere, typically they were the people or their countries that were colonized, but also now they are some of the poorest countries. So why is it that there is a mindset that they shouldn't be allowed to get access into certain things? Another thing, in the Netherlands, I am not allowed to drive. I'm allowed to drive for the first year, and after the first year, I have to go for a Dutch driver's license. So my head goes, why? Okay, you drive on the other side of the road. I can understand. Okay, that makes sense. But if you come from the UK, you can drive here, and the UK also drives on the left side of the road. So it makes me think, okay, why are all these policies in place, and what does it mean for me as a person of color, or anyone else from that matter?
Okay, Okay.
Yeah. And just to add to your studies, this will take only 2 minutes. Just to add to your studies, I was looking as well and doing some research. And I found this study that was done in Germany, and they were talking to, because we're talking about foreigners now. These are people, they did a study, the same experiment with job applications. But these were people who were second generation German, right? People who had
born here,
who have immigration backgrounds, but were born here. They grew up here. They went through the German school system, and the same phenomenon appears. Right, the very same. Right, and the people with German backgrounds did not have much of a let's put it this way: the people from Spain and from other Western European countries, and people from Japan and China had more or less the same chances of getting an interview, right? And people with African backgrounds, even if they were mixed, had the least, right? And then people who had a Muslim background also had the least chance of getting a call for an interview. And they sent out, we're talking about like 6,000 applications. So it wasn't like a small experiment.
Okay, so there is evidence. I would like to move the discussion on, if I may. There's probably also a situation where you or other people of color experience a situation where there are people who want to do good. They realize that something is skewed, biased, and they want to display a behavior to compensate for this, but is going into the wrong direction. I'm not sure, Pierre-Yves, Abiola, who wants to take this, but do you encounter any of that where do-gooders behave in a way that is actually another way of discrimination?
Several times, but I don't know if, Pierre-Yves, do you want to go first? Or
go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. Mine is actually, there's several. I have quite a number, but the one that really touches me, I would talk about my son's experience, right? He was in kindergarten. He was 3. And then he came home one day in tears. And I said, what's the matter? He said, why aren't I white? He was 3. Why aren't I white? I want to be white. And I asked him, why? But he couldn't articulate why. He was 3, right? And so I decided to go with him to kindergarten the next day to see what was going on. And it turns out that it was summer, they were playing outside, and the people who work in the kindergarten, they really liked him. It was meant well, but they kept telling him things like, I wish I had your skin. I wish I had your tan. I wouldn't have to sit in the sun. I just want to be like your skin. And I love your curly hair. It's so cute. But the only thing it did was make him feel different. And it was interesting that I kept thinking to myself, so by trying to pay him compliments, they were just highlighting to him that he was different.
Wow. Right?
And those are some of the things. My son still get comments like, you speak good German, but they're German, right? Yeah. They're German. Where are you from? I'm from Frankfurt. No, where are you really from?
Offenbach.
Yeah, right? And just things like, can I touch your hair? Your hair's so nice. Can I touch it? No. But it's meant to be a compliment, but you just don't do that. It ends up just saying, I see you as this puppet. I can touch you and play with you, right? Rather than seeing you as an individual with the same qualities.
Does something like this also happen in the business world? An equivalent of that?
Very subtly, I think that one of it, at least in German, that I noticed is assuming that I'm not German. So there are Germans talking in a meeting, I walk in and they immediately switch. It's meant well, it's meant to be polite, but how do they know I'm not German? I haven't said anything, right?
Yeah. Makes me think, Pierre-Yves, because that could be me switching to English, actually,
my hair is another one. I was at work the other day And sometimes I have my hair differently. It's short, sometimes it's long. I just do all kinds of experiments with my hair. And all of a sudden, somebody comes up to me and just touches it. It's
too close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pierre-Yves, what's your experience with this?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to report as painful experiences as Abiola is reporting right now. That sounds extremely, extremely painful. And I'm puzzled by how it's extremely, extremely difficult, or let's put it that way, it's very difficult to remove emotion from the discussion we're trying to have. And it's very, very difficult to try and think conceptually about what happens. There was an attempt earlier on to find a way of conceptualizing a bit what we're trying to discuss, but I find it extremely, extremely difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's a reflection of that it is difficult, I guess, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, there's one more thing I thought of. Oh gosh, if I'm talking too much, let me know. Right?
Actually, I would like to give Racheal the word in a minute. So, but go ahead.
Okay, it'll take a minute. And basically, what it is to do with by meaning well that people just ignore it and don't actually acknowledge it, right? So let me just ignore it and not talk about it at all, right? I am Black and I stand by it and I'm proud of it. And if somebody asks me, well, how do you do your hair? I don't mind. If somebody asks me what it's like to be, I don't mind. What I don't want is the evaluation of the fact that I am Black. But there's nothing wrong in being completely open and asking me questions about my race. It's okay. It's the evaluation that matters.
And the evaluation is sometimes not even conscious, I suppose, right?
It isn't always, no.
Racheal, what's your take on this?
So I have so much to share. It's where do I stop, or where do I start? I think the first thing, maybe related to a difference that I see with Pierre-Yves in one of his comments was that he first sees in France you're French, and I've noticed a difference. I mean, I've seen it in South Africa. I've noticed it in Belgium. I also notice in the Netherlands. In fact, the Netherlands is quite vocal. If you do share something in terms of saying, I disagree, they normally tend to respond to you with, go back to your country, which I also find, I mean, I'm a foreigner, I can understand that, but I do pay taxes, so I feel like I can have a right to say certain things. But I have people, or friends of mine, who are born in this country. And when they try to say something, because they're a person of color, they're told to go back to their country. And one of the things, when this came out, I had to ask myself, why? Why is it suddenly a global thing? And I spoke to a lot of friends of mine. I spent hours with some friends that are Black, that have been born in this country or even in Belgium. And they said, we've tried to say things for so long, and every time we say it, there's always something that comes against us. Someone will say, many different things. And it was quite strange in a way, because some of my friends told me these things. And then I started posting about racial bias, more from an awareness point of view. Because, I did say to you yesterday, I have brown privilege, right? So in South Africa, I realized in terms of the hierarchy with apartheid, and I found out by going through to a transformation workshop with someone that was, more around during the active part of apartheid, knew, what actually happened. And in apartheid, I mean, basically it was Dutch people that went to South Africa, and because some of the people of color were, actually doing well, they decided to come up with apartheid, and they literally went through a hierarchy of, okay, so Afrikaans white, English white, Japanese, Indian, and then all the, like colored, black, and it went to a lot of detail. So I had to find out for myself at some point that I have brown privilege because I had access to better education. I had access to better housing. I had access to a better network, because there were people that were educated. For example, I found out through my history teacher that told me, historically, this is what's happening, because I wouldn't have known it, before that. And I think, I found in the Netherlands and in Belgium, and in South Africa, that a lot of people, they've been trying to communicate and say, I am not this entire population. I am not, my entire group. I want you to see me as an individual. And one of the things I think that's a real problem is when people use narratives, right? So the words that they use, and this is when they're trying to mean well, but they don't. So Abiola said something about asking where you're from. I've had more than one occasion. It's so many times that it's a little bit of a joke now that I actually said I'm going to do, get a little T-shirt with my entire genealogy, because people ask me, where are you from? South Africa. Where's your parents from? South Africa. Where's your grandparents from? And this is someone I just met. South Africa. Where's your great-grandparents from? South Africa. Where's your great-great-grandparents from? Well, actually, they came from India. Aha, I knew you were Indian. So for me, it's just ignore the last 175 years of my history, ignore my identity of who I am, and go immediately to calling me Indian. And even though I'm South African, people still refer to me as Indian. In South Africa, they refer to me as Indian and not South African. So I lose my identity. And I've seen it in the Netherlands as well. People born here, they're called Indonesian, they called, an immigrant from a certain country, but they're not called Dutch. In South Africa, you don't call someone Dutch South African. A white person, you call them South African. And I think this is the thing where it's so ingrained in everything that sometimes people are not aware that when people say I'm Indian, I've never been to India. I wasn't born there. I've never been there. I have no idea about the particular culture. I recognize it's part of my history. And one day I'd like to go there, but you cannot label me as Indian.
Right.
And I think that's where the anger, because people relate to all the stuff they've been putting up with. And friends of mine, directly related to George Floyd, black friends of mine have said, a black male friend of mine, he said, I don't know if I will be killed because of the color of my skin. Mm-hmm. I've got a friend of mine who's a black female. She's got 2 boys, and she said, I don't know if my boys will be safe. So people recognize it, and there's a fear because they've been going through a lot of this on a regular basis. I have one last thing before I'm going to move on. The other thing I've noticed for myself in terms of racism that I've experienced in Europe, if I am alone, I experience it. If I'm walking with someone who's white, a friend of mine, I do not experience it.
Then you're legalized, or then you're approved, or whatever.
Or maybe it's seen as, it's not okay to do it because I do have someone.
Oh, protection. Okay. Guard. Yeah. I would like to.
Tolani would want to share something.
Yeah, I would like to continue, however, with the interview and open it up for questions later, if I may. One more thing with regards to, so what can we do? Let's move on to this one before we open up the discussion. So as business owners, for example, as leaders, as managers who are hiring people, as managers who have people, colleagues from different backgrounds, from different ethnicities, different skin colors, what is it that we can concretely do? I'm not sure who wants it.
I'll take a stab at that.
Please.
Karsten. Again, everything is going to be, to me, everything is going to be contextual. And contextual in the terms of being extremely, extremely aware of what's going on, not only within your organization, but around your organization. And it takes a lot of effort in leadership situations, because it forces you to analyze.
Mm-hmm.
It forces you to analyze and think about what's going on, which country you operate in, which industry you operate in, what type of people you're having, what you're trying to achieve. So that is one thing. But the other thing is being very, very, very aware of what influences you're getting in, and that prevents you from thinking. And not make generalization in terms of, I'm going to take a playbook of this is how you handle HR, or this is you handle people of color, or this is you handle gay people, or this is you handle this and that and everything. It's really a matter of making sure you really understand that there is a platform where everyone, and we're going back to the notion of universalism, has equal opportunities to progress in your organization, and then deliver on the policies and execute the policies to make sure it works. With that one aspect. There is this societal aspect of your company as well, which is, what do you stand for? So you stand for, of course, for a business. That's what we're on business, and that's what we're advising business leaders. But you need to think about the impact of the business you're doing societally. If that has an impact in the way you're hiring people and the communities you're around, etc., and it will gradually go down to, do we give this equal opportunities to people that come across the population that you service, but the community where you live? Good. If it's not happening, what are you going to do about it? So to me, it's always a question of thinking very, very, very carefully about what's happening and making sure that you have policies that are adequate to the objective you're trying to achieve, and then execute.
Maybe let me ask the question a bit more concretely. So we are about 140 coaches in our organization. I realized that none of our coaches happens to be Black. None of our coaches, as far as I know, happens to be Muslim. And none of our coaches, as far as I know, happens to be gay. So the question is, what do you do when you have the policies in place, but you may have filters that somehow exclude those people from even applying, because maybe we are coming across as whitish, maybe we are coming across as male or whatever, right? So I'm really looking for advice. How do we do this? I get the thinking, Pierre-Yves, but concrete.
So let's take the example that you just related to, which is your company. And I would start by asking myself, are you concretely aware of what's happening? Is that discussions that happen in your organization? I don't know what the structure of leadership of your organization is, but is this being discussed in your organization? And is part of your ethos as a company, is there congruence between what you say you want to do and what you're really doing? So are you saying in your company you want diversity in your company? Is that clear, black and white, so to speak, in what you say?
The answer is yes. The question is, what is diversity?
So can I have another bet? Yeah.
Racheal, please.
I think, practically, the first thing we need to realize is we all have confirmation bias, right? And confirmation bias is, I tend to look for people or interpret information that confirms my own thinking. So I make decisions based on that. So that's the first thing you need to do as a company, as a leader, as a coach. And then you need to, before you even challenge and before you even start looking at what do I need to do differently, you need to say why. You need to find out, why do I want to do this differently? Because if you cannot say there's a reason why I want to do this, if you do not have a business case for it, there's no point going forward. It's just going to be, a person of color that's put on. I mean, I told you I also do a lot of work with women in leadership. I see the same bias with companies. They hire one female in a board or in a big team of males, she never gets heard. The culture is the same. I actually have a client that I was working with, coaching with her, and she said, there's nothing I can do, because when I go in, it's the same thing. I'm treated as a woman, I'm treated as less. Most of the time, people tend to treat me in a way that is perceived through their filter. So the culture is not going to change. You can hire one person, nothing's going to happen, right? So you need to say why, and there's a business case for it, because I found, working as a coach, sometimes I stand in the front of the room, and this has been a few years ago, where I've seen there's white, male, Dutch, German, Belgian, British coaches, and me. And I'm standing out. So usually I say, oh, it's interesting that I'm the only female, the only person of color. And then what is quite interesting from a positive point of view, the people that do coach with me, they normally say, oh, I'm so glad I see someone that is a person of color or a woman, because I can relate to you. This makes more sense. I'd rather have you than someone else. Mm-hmm. So looking at the why, some of the things, in terms of the why, it's just good business. If you have a business that is not representative of society, what are you missing out on, right? So I know I make decisions based on businesses that do not take my, unique perspective into consideration. So if I, for example, look at makeup, in Europe, it's normally geared towards white people. So I can never get the right foundation. Abiola's laughing. I can never get the right color lipstick. Even clothes, most of the time, clothes are beige or black. No colors that would actually suit me. So I will go to shop at places that actually have thought about it. So it gives you a business edge. The other thing is, the policies, recruitment. Am I recruiting with people that are actually looking for different types of people, and also what are some of my questions? I went to an interview where I was more experienced than the person interviewing me, and I will not say where this was, for leadership, for executive coaching, and the person acted as the two people acted as gateways, or a gatekeeper. By starting to talk about looks. And I remember I was here for the first year, and I thought, is this an interview? What is happening? Is this a joke? And they basically went and spoke about nothing in particular, and I knew I was not going to get any work from them, and I did not. So what are the biases that your recruiters, for example, have? I have more, but I'm going to give Abiola a chance to share.
And you have it in writing, and we can share all that you have afterwards with the auditorium, Racheal. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So my turn, right?
Yeah, you
I
go.
also have it in writing.
A manifesto.
Yes, exactly. When you ask what leaders can do, there are several things, right? There are a lot of coaches on this call. That means you do a lot of leadership development work. It starts there. It starts when they are training to be leaders, right? How do you have difficult conversations with the people that are working with you? You have to be able to receive serious feedback from people who may feel that you are being insensitive or discriminatory towards them. Mm-hmm. Because that is one way of being able to at least accept people and listen to their stories. When you have leaders that are in the development stage, very sensitive and also very aware of what their white privilege is, and maybe conversations like this, right? Then they have a different perspective when they get in. That's number one. So we have to make sure that our leaders have the capabilities, right, to deal with this. Because in the end, we can do all we want, but if they can't have these difficult situations, difficult conversations, and cannot see the world in a different way, then it won't work. That's number one. Then we come to the organizational culture. Let's say the leader is now there, right? We come to the organizational culture. It always starts from the top. I always tell my students in OB that if you want to change the culture of an organization, you have to start from the top. You have to give, we call it a sense of urgency. Why and why now, right? You have to tell the people on your organization and rationalize why and why now. Why do we need to be diverse? Racheal has talked about the advantages. I won't repeat, but those are the kinds of things that you have to bring across to the people that work in your organization. This is why we need to do this, right? And then, again, another thing is you walk the talk, right? You don't just take, we call it tokenism, where you just have one, and we see it a lot in in research on gender, right? You have one or maybe two, right? Just so that people will just say that you're diverse, right? You don't want that. You want to have it as a core value. And if your HR, we call them the HR practices, right, all go with those core values. How do you have strategies, right? Each organization has a strategy. They implement that strategy. Everybody is very clear what the core values of that organization are. Why don't we do the same with discrimination, racism, and just saying we don't tolerate this? We want to be inclusive. We want people from all walks of life. We want to look like society. Why isn't that a core value? And that will then also say, okay, people, you know how it is when you have a culture and you maintain it. It will determine the kind of people you hire, the kind of people you promote, the kind of people that you fire, basically, right? It has to go into the core of that organization. Now, how do you get these people? You say, okay, you want to hire people from diverse backgrounds. You want to hire Black people. You want to hire people from different races. Where do you find them? Where do you even do your hiring? Where do you do your recruiting? Maybe you do your recruiting in places where you won't find them, right? Go look. Mentoring is a very big thing. And mentoring doesn't mean just, talking to somebody and finding out if the person is okay. You're mentoring to take that person to the C room. You're mentoring to make that person grow, right? So why don't you think about, okay, where am I going to, where would I find, where can I go that I can, and look in your recruiting team, make your recruiting team diverse. I think Racheal said that as well. If people see people like them in your recruiting team, then they will want to come as well, right? And so these are very far-reaching things. These are things that will take a long time, but it requires determination, and it requires the ability of leaders to be able to show their vulnerabilities, right? And to be able to show empathy to people. And those are the things that gain trust, because if people don't trust you, they won't come to you.
Thank you, Abiola. First of all, I love that energy, and also that the way you put that into a structure that makes a lot of sense. And with that, I would like to open it up for the auditorium to ask questions. So if I can ask you to raise your hand.
Tolani has her hand up for quite some time.
Please go ahead. You probably need to unmute her, Doris.
I did it.
Hi, thank you very much to everyone for this. It's been very interesting just listening to different perspectives on this issue that's at the top of everyone's mind at the moment. I think that following up on what I wanted to talk about before is sort of past now, there's no point going back there. But in the what to do moving forward, I think the more leaders of organizations understand that this is not an altruistic thing. This isn't diversity because it's nice.
Yeah.
This is at the end of the day, as Racheal said, it's about your dollars and cents. And if you have, I don't care where you are in the world right now, if you go outside your door and see the diversity of people out there, and whether you're a hospital, a school, a FMCG company, you are selling something. And the more relatable you are to the people you're selling it to, the more successful you're going to be. So it's a simple, so that it doesn't it's not about we're being nice. It's not about George Floyd got killed and let's all be nice to each other. There is one aspect of that. But really, when it comes to dollars and cents, most of you coaches, MBAs, people who've traveled, systemic racism, you don't need to go far. Go to an airport in Europe. As a person of color, I have a US passport and a UK passport as well as a Nigerian passport. It makes no difference. when I get to the airport. If I have to talk to an immigration official, I'm carrying a US passport, he will ask me, where am I from? Even with a US passport. So let's go to the airports first. And then that takes us to the leaders. And then we go to the leaders of the country. And we're not going to go into that discussion now, because the fish rots from the head.
That is universally true. And thanks, Tolani, for that statement. Do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Good.
I just have a little comment to that. I agree with Tolani completely. There's just something I wanted to say, that in this day and age, right, we talk about, yes, we cannot forget performance and good performance. The interesting thing about those studies in Germany talking about the recruiting was that they controlled for performance. The performance was actually not the issue, right? These were people that were doing well, and you still had those differences, right? And talking about the profitability, why organizations should be diverse, there's something that Racheal said yesterday, and we discussed it a bit, and I really loved it. It's like, we don't need pity. That's not the whole idea of this whole thing. I don't need your pity. I'm fine, right? But what we want is that we want, if we're talking and having this narrative, listen to me and then go and do something about it, right? Let's not have this nice talk today, and in 2 weeks' time, we all move on as life will speak. We're having this talk today. Every time we have a narrative, I don't want to say, oh, I feel sorry, or how horrible, and then leave it at that. That's not enough. You get up and you do something about it.
Can I just share something?
I would like to give Swan the opportunity to come in, please.
Okay.
If I may, Racheal, and we come back to you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I understand a lot of what you're saying about how to work it, doing the profitability stuff and the business cases. I know a lot of those things about the whole issues around women's and gender, trying to get more women into leadership positions. And I think it is very important to me personally, but also for everyone else involved, to remember that it is not just about a profitability thing. I mean, at most, the argument of profitability is some kind of tool for people who don't understand. I mean, it's a deeply ethical issue. It's about fairness, and it's about mindsets in terms of the assumptions we have. As soon as somebody else looks different, people start having assumptions, and how our assumptions are formed. And I think I really like what you said, Abiola, about the ability to have difficult conversations, because these conversations are truly difficult, and so it's very helpful to hear you all talk about how can we have conversations about race, for example, and I've personally experienced some of the difficulties with a woman in various kind of organizational fields where some conversations are also very difficult to handle. I just think it's very important, even when we're out in the business world as coaches or whatever else, to remember that there is a deeply ethical dimension here that just has to do with respecting people for who they are as individuals and not basing our interactions with them on assumptions that we have.
Yeah.
Thanks,
and there's something, Swan, I think that is fantastic. There's something that we teach our students in responsible leadership. And this is something that came from Elkington. I think it was even ages ago. I think he came up with this model in the 70s or 80s. And he talks about the 3 Ps as being the objectives of organizations: profit, people, planet. And the young people today are the leaders of tomorrow. And more they demand that organizations follow these three Ps, and that they and that they bring value to the stakeholders in those 3 areas. And ethics and fairness belong to the people part of it in a very strong way. So it's not just profit anymore.
Yeah. Uli, you had your hand up. You're on mute.
Okay. Yeah, my question is, if we assume that diversity is king, so let's assume leaders know it, company knows it, how do we make it happen? So do we ask you, okay, you are black, you would be cool. It would be cool to have you in our team because you are black, or you are a female. It would be wonderful to have 3 of you because females should be change the dynamic of discussions. And so how could we ask somebody, I like you because I think you are different. So how could you do that in a company?
Racheal.
If I can respond, I mean, it comes back to my previous point that I did want to mention, talking about your why. And Swan, I do agree with you that you need to say it's just the right thing to do. Ulrika, I hope I pronounced her name right. If you do come with that intention, then you will attract someone. So I know from my side, if you say it's the right thing to do because I do see that we need to do it, you will attract a lot of people that will want to be part of the team. But one of the things, I mean, I kind of wrote, because I like things to be simple. When you walk away, you have something to say, okay, this is something I have. So I wrote down, not quite an equation, but something just to remember. So education, and this is for everyone, education, listen to understand, not listen to fight, argue, defend, negotiate. What if we pay you less money? Because if you're telling me you're going to pay me less money, I'm going to say, no, thank you. I'm going somewhere else. So education, listen to understand, plus empathy. So empathize with people. If you're inviting them in, if they're part of a team, what is your experience? Use your empathy in that conversation. So what can we do to make this better for you? What do you need? What is lacking? Same thing for women in leadership and women in organizations and for people of color. And then on the other side, what can you do? So you're listening to understand the story and the journey of someone else on the one side that you're trying to attract or you have attracted. And then the other side, you'd need to take responsibility. So responsibility in order to understand or become aware of some of the things that are happening. Then also to adjust, to make adjustments for certain things. So for example, I wrote white privilege or maybe male privilege.
Mm-hmm.
I had, for example, women are not good negotiators. Historically, men have been proven to be better negotiators. So they paid historically more. And I've even had it on a program where someone negotiated, a male colleague negotiated higher. And I could react and say, oh, but that's not fair. But also recognize exactly where people are coming from. Are they going to push? Or are they, not really aware, can I push for higher salary? Can I push for something else? So how do you adjust? And then the conversations. So what conversations are you having? In South Africa, I used to facilitate transformational team discussions. So now that you're here, talk about, okay, what are some of the things that I find difficult? I found in South Africa, Black people historically found it more uncomfortable to talk out in a group because, the way they were raised, they were raised to think that their opinion was less. So how do you have these conversations? How do you, ask people instead of waiting for them to share? How do you invite them into a conversation? Mm-hmm. And, I think that's really important. Maybe, again, Abiola said, coaching, mentoring, even sponsorship. How do you actually help people to progress? And I have one last thing that Maya Angelou said, once you know better, do better.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think what I hear you say, I mean, if it all boils down to being genuine about it, not paying lip service, not playing tactics because it's fashionable, but being real and being sincere about it and have a discussion around all the biases, all the patterns that we have working and acknowledge that they are working in every person, every human being, and that we need to create awareness around them to overcome them, right? Yeah. We cannot ignore them, and we're not bad people because we have them, but it is this awareness piece. And I think that also boils down to Pierre-Yves saying that it has to be put into the context and also looked into this concrete situation. So what is it that I'm operating with right now? Right?
Yeah, and it's the weaving, because we started with systemic racism and structural racism, and what I see is the weaving of society back together to say we're all the same, we just have different skin colors. I like the color of my skin. I don't want to be be white. As one person said when they met me, they said, "Oh, you're like a white person." No, I'm that's an insult to me. Okay, I'm like me. But with these conversations, what happens is there's a healing and a weaving that comes together to say, you're just like me and I'm just like you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Are there more questions in the audience?
I have one comment coming to this, keeping in mind that, we would want to hire for diversity and so on. And I have observed, when it actually boomeranged very badly. So in a company, we wanted to have females to have a gender neutrality, it doesn't matter, from which part of the world you are coming from. We wanted to have Africans, Indians, and from different, migrants group. All of this looked good, and we were able to do diversity, and it was all done in a way to have a program that, this is being done to do that. But come a summer party, people get drunk, and this leader who did this for that, he actually spilled it okay, we hired these guys for looking good. So wow. That's the thing, when you wanted to do good, actually it turned out to be really bad, it bad for the leader. So I think in the thought process of and what even Racheal is saying, we should not be trying to be good. We have to be good and hire for merit, and in the merit you will find people from all genders, all races, all diversity. You don't need to do anything extra. But if you can remove those biases, which is trying to hold you back, and you want to then do extra, sometimes in a stress situation or in a very situation where you are not with your conscious, it will come out and it will spill out that okay, that was not the real intention, but it was something else. So I think the whole process has to be looked that we are equal.
Thank you, Nikhil. And that goes back to being genuine, right? That's genuine right. About what you're doing, genuine about your deeds. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Pierre-Yves, Abiola, Racheal, any closing statements from your side?
I have one from my side.
Please.
I have two. You go ahead.
No, I have a lot, but I have one. I mean, I did send some resources or some books, to learn and to educate. I think, have conversations, because you've seen 3 different people of color, 3 different opinions, 3 different personalities, 3 different backgrounds, 3 people. And I think that's the important thing, not, we had people of color, a group. Right. So have conversations, because the more conversations you have, the more it reveals what different people are thinking, the more you can learn. And I wrote down something which I thought was quite interesting as a takeaway. The first thing is, I always say in coaching conversations, there's a lot of grace in relationships when you have good relationships. Mm-hmm. So when you have open relationships and you have conversations where you can actually say, look, I don't know what I'm saying. I want to try to understand. Help me. I want to understand. So asking open-ended questions. So you can get it wrong, say sorry, do it again, start again.
Thank you, Racheal.
All right. So should I say my 2?
Absolutely.
I do have some resources for people who are at least in Germany, because there's actually been quite a lot of research about structural racism in Germany, how it comes across. If you want all this information, I've sent it to Karsten. He can send it out to you. Number 2, just taking on what Racheal said, I noticed that many people walk on eggshells when it comes to talking about race. But as long as you do it from a place of wanting to learn and a place of honesty, you will be okay. Mm-hmm. Right? And we, on the other hand, as Black people also, there are these barriers that make us mistrust, right? And we too, those barriers are poison to us. We have to also speak and open up. If you see something happening, speak up. Don't be quiet. Speak up. Those are the ways that you move forward. And I saw a very good friend of mine said to me 2 or 3 days ago, he says, don't move on, move forward. Let's not stop this here. Let's move forward. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Thank you, Abiola. Pierre-Yves.
Karsten, couple of things. I think I'll build on what Racheal and Abiola said, and I would say the criteria, I think, to get into the conversations or to act or to drive your business, in my point, have to be around fairness, opportunity, development. If you feel that you're filling those 3 criteria, you're doing well. It gets from that point that you'll know that you are treating a person of color or yellow or white or brown or handicapped fairly or not fairly. I think that's what matters. And that's how we drive things around those criteria. And naturally, if you are doing your job well as a leader, the questions of race, the question of gender, the question of sexual orientation, the question of faith, or the question of handicap, not handicap, would be addressed along those 3 criteria.
Thank you very much. I think it was highly educational. It was highly human. I felt we covered the emotional part, we covered the political part, but we then went into so what do we do about this, and how can we treat this in a practical way? And I learned something, and I hope I can speak also for my colleagues that we learned something, and this will be a start of a discussion that we have in this company, not the end, and it will not be a nice to have. I'm standing for that myself. So thank you very much. Thank you, Racheal. Thank you, Abiola. Thank you, Pierre-Yves. Thank you for your time and showing yourself. And let's stay in touch. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Karsten. Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you to you for having the conversation and inviting us. So
absolutely.
Thanks to the participants for listening.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
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 And what have you learned, Karsten?
That was a very interesting discussion, wasn't it? I've learned a ton. I think the most essential part of tonight was that it is a question of attitude. It is a question of to which degree are we aware of the biases that all of us carry, and also to understand that it is normal to carry those biases. It's actually biological to carry those biases, but it is a question of, if we want to create a different world, we kind of need to identify them and then sometimes act counterintuitively to achieve better outcomes in the business world. That's my number one takeaway. And there's not so much the what we do, it's the question with what is the attitude behind it, to which degree are we willing to question our own instincts, our auto pilot settings that we sometimes have. And so let's see how we can make this work in the world outside.
And what else is new at Leadership Choices?
On July 10, I will start my next fundraising tour for CIS. That means I will cycle self-supported over a period of 3 weeks. I will follow the Eastern German borders. So first of all, I will cycle from Heidelberg to Görlitz, then following the German-Polish border to the Baltic Sea. On the Baltic Sea coastline westbound till Travemünde, and then going south following the former boundary between, or the border between the 2 Germanys, down to Hof in Bavaria and then back home. That's 2,500 kilometers. I will be living in a tent, cooking food with self-supported gear, and preparing for my next trip to Canada as good as I can in Germany. And so that will be something that is definitely interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to that. And it also scares me a little bit. So watch out for more on this channel.
What can we look forward to in the next episode of Leaders Talk?
Our next guest in Leaders Talk is Jörg Birkelbach. Jörg Birkelbach originally is a banker. He used to have a career at Saal Oppenheim, but now he's operating a private TV station incubator and is running a TV station called Fundraising TV. And that made me curious. I wanted to understand what is the background behind this, why that change of career, and so I'm very much looking forward to learn more about Jörg in our next conversation at Leaders Talk.
This was an episode of Leaders Talk, the interview podcast portraying leaders who are committed to better leadership, better organizations, and a better world, powered by Leadership Choices. If you want to give us feedback, please send an email to leaderstalk@leadership-choices.com. Thank you for listening.